So 6 years ago, I moved to Orlando for college. I was excited and I was nervous, and I didn't really know anyone here. For my first semester, I had 3 roommates. They were random. We didn't really click. And I kind of felt pretty alone that semester. I met people here and there, classes, whatever, but I wasn't able to form a core group of friends. In my experience, it isn't unique. You can walk among a campus of 60,000 students and still feel alone. You can have a whole day's worth of human interactions without making a real human exchange. And sometimes it's even hard to link up with the people that we care about. My parents, my family is scattered across the United States. My friends are busy with their lives, their responsibilities, school. But this loneliness, this disconnection, it's not just for some weird people who are relegated to the corner. It's actually structural to the way that our society is. It's a big part of how we live our lives today. And the research shows that it's only getting worse. The AARP recently published a study where they asked people, adults 45 and over, if they felt lonely. 40% said they were lonely. A similar study in the 1980s only found 20%. The Census Bureau tracks how many people live in single-person households, people who live by themselves. In the 1970s, that rate was 17%. In the 1970s, that rate was 17%. And 40 years later, in 2012, that was at 27%. That's a 58% increase. And the causes of this problem are messy, and they're tangled, and they're many. Some people blame technology. Some people blame the rise of urban sprawl and the isolated nuclear family unit in the suburbs. Or maybe it's the rise of mobility, the way that we uproot our whole social infrastructure to move to a new city and chase opportunity. But my point today is that it doesn't need to be that way. Today, I want to propose a solution. I believe that we can form deep, meaningful human connections with people over time. I believe that we can form rich, in-person social networks if we design experiences that can create those. I believe that connectivity and community are the antidotes to loneliness. So today, I'm going to argue that if we can raise up the concept of the party, the celebratory social gathering, if we can change the way we think of parties, change it from a cheap escape to an engine for value and connectivity and community, then we can transform people's lives and put a big dent in the deep societal causes of loneliness. So I'm going to propose a new structure for parties. I'm going to say principles for connectivity, and then I'm going to talk about principles for community. And this talk isn't just based on theory. For the past 22 months, myself and a close group of friends have been building a microcosm of what the world can be. For the past 22 months, we've been producing monthly dance parties called Body Talk. Dance parties that have helped over 2,000 people feel the amazing time of a great night out. Nights full of laughter, new friendships, and connections that last beyond the party. And over time, these connections have evolved into a community. So, like I said, I'm going to talk about how parties can drive connectivity and community, and then I'm going to talk about the principles. So, I know what you're thinking right now. I'm using all this high language and fancy words to talk about parties, but you've been to a party, you know what a party is. You're probably picturing, something like this: heavy drinking, keg stands, right? And drugs and bad decisions. And I get it. That's all fun and good, but ultimately, it's unsustainable. Ultimately, those kinds of experiences are not a healthy life practice. I'm here to talk about parties where you find yourself. Experiences that over time can build healthy, homegrown communities and that can satisfy that deep human desire to feel belonging and connection. I was recently talking to a new body talker, Caleb. Caleb is 19. He has social anxiety. He's trans. And for him, these parties are an important part of his life. I'm going to tell you something he told me recently, and I quote, "There's this level of genuine acceptance that exists at the core of the entire environment, and it radiates throughout most of the attendees. This unique push towards acceptance and genuine connection makes someone like me, who is socially anxious, awkward, and transgender, not feel so effing displaced in this world." Parties, social gatherings, when we structure them with purpose and intention, they can create that deep sense of connection that we crave. And that's not a new concept, actually. The very roots of club culture, house music culture, were born in New York and Chicago in the early 80s from sexual minorities, gay people who couldn't express their authentic selves in everyday society. They came together at night in safe spaces like the Paradise Garage in New York or the Warehouse in Chicago. They came together to feel connection in a place of trust, surrounded by people who were like them. So I want to bring together some of my own experience and some examples and try and codify what makes a party that can drive connectivity and parties that can drive community into some guiding principles. So let's talk about connectivity. What does that mean? It's a big word. Well, to connect means to link two entities together. Connectivity is the ability to link two entities together. So if I have good internet connectivity, it means my laptop is connecting to Wi-Fi and data's flowing in, data's flowing out. Poor connectivity means I might be trying to connect to Wi-Fi, but maybe I'm not connecting, or maybe the connection's really slow. What does that mean for people? Well, with people, strong connectivity means that I'm standing across from you and we're making eye contact and we're sharing stories, sharing laughs, sharing emotions. So I'm going to talk about 4 principles for a highly connective party. So I'm going to talk about 4 principles for a highly connective party. Because most parties, most social environments, the people who are organizing them, they're not thinking about stuff like this. So the first principle for a highly connective party is use space to bring people closer together. The most important decision that you'll make when you're throwing a party is which venue to choose, because you want to know that the space is the right size for the number of people who are going to be there. You've all been to a dance floor like this, right? Where you go and it's kind of awkward, right? Like you don't know whether to approach people or not because it's just so spread out. But there's other ways to structure them where people are actually bumping into each other and more likely to strike up a conversation. And if the venue isn't perfect, there's still things that you can do to make it feel better, to direct the flow of people better. You can use things like curtains or tables or just the placement of objects to make people walk in a way where they're gonna run into each other. The second principle for a highly connective party is to have a talking space. Revolutionary concept. When you go to an average nightclub, the music's really loud and immersive, and that's really cool because if you're dancing, that's what you want. But when we go out, we're not just going out to feel the music, we're going out to be social, right? That's what parties are about. So if you have a dedicated, optimized talking space, then you can do that. You can talk and you can meet each other and you can connect on a different level. The third principle for a highly connective party is to have multiple activities. When you walk into the average nightclub, You walk in and what do you see? A line for the bathroom, a line for the bar, and a dance floor that might be engaging or might not be engaging if no one's even on it. On the flip side, if you have multiple activities, if you have things like Cards Against Humanity, if you have board games, if you have multiple ways for people to engage with each other, to be creative with each other, then it'll make it more connective. For instance, at Body Talk, we have things like face painters, which means that you can be creative by making art on someone's face. You can engage with other people in that intimate kind of space where you have more things to do. We also do things like a name tag game, where you walk into the door and you're gonna get a name tag like Kanye West or Vladimir Putin or whatever. And because of that, people are gonna don this new identity and they're gonna be creative with each other. It's an easy conversation starter. And the fourth and final principle for a highly connective party is to have a friendly staff. If you walk into a party and the first person you're greeted with just doesn't want to be there and they don't care, it's not going to set you up to have a good time. On the flip side, if the first person that you see is smiling and they genuinely care, if they're even part of the culture, like they get it, then that's going to set the tone for how people are going to behave in the environment, and it's going to set up a completely different expectation. So those are the 4 principles for a highly connective party. And now I want to talk about community. So community is kind of an esoteric word. What does it mean? It brings to mind like concepts of support, maybe like brotherly love, maybe like I don't know you but I like you because we have something in common. And it's so rare in everyday society. It's so rare in modern society. Maybe we feel it at our yoga studios. Maybe we feel it on campus. Maybe we feel it at the local coffee shop. But what these things have in common is that you're seeing the same people over time, and there's a likelihood that you have something in common with each other. So I want to talk about the 4 principles for a community-driven party. And the first principle is to know your identity. If I'm going to a party, I want to know that the people who are there are going to be like me, at least on some level. Diversity is great, but also I hope we have similar interests. So if you're throwing a party and you know who you are, and you also know who you aren't, you're going to be a lot more likely to hit that niche audience that wants to go to that party. And I'm not saying that every party needs to be like Body Talk. Body Talk is a great party for 20-something-year-old hipsters who like to dance to Radiohead and techno. That's not for everyone. But whether you're part of the hip-hop community or the goth community or the nerdcore community, these are still important principles to think about. So the second principle for a community-driven party is to embrace the resident musician. A really common strategy among promoters nowadays, people who book concerts and shows, is to look at the list of available artists, look at how many Facebook likes they have, and just choose based on who's going to draw the biggest crowd. Well, if you're doing that, this artist might have this kind of crowd, this other artist might have that kind of crowd, and you're tearing down this infrastructure every time. If I'm going to a community-driven party, I want to know that there's going to be some kind of consistency. I want to have a reasonable expectation of what I'm getting into every time I go. So there's actually a rich history of house bands and resident DJs, which means that there's a similar musical consistency between party to party. And because of that, the house musician, the resident artist, starts to form a relationship with the crowd, where they know what to expect from the crowd, and the crowd starts to understand what to expect from them. And if I'm going to a party, I want to know, will I be able to dance, right? And if there's a resident musician who's good at that, then that'll be a reasonable expectation. And that doesn't mean that it needs to be the same music every time, just because it's a resident musician. The Grateful Dead never played 2 sets the same way. They never played the same set twice, but they had a rich culture around them, and they always brought the party. So the third principle for a community-driven party is to make it monthly. If my friend Hannah invites me out to a party and I've never been there before, what's the first question I'm going to ask? Who's going? Right? A good party is one where I have friends. And if you make your event less regular, if it's not every week, but it's every month, then it's going to be a lot more likely that when you do go, you're going to be able to see the people that you care about and see the community of people that you want to see. And we've seen this with Body Talk, actually, because the people who have moved away from Orlando will come back here during the weekend of a Body Talk, because they know that if they go to this one event, they're not just going to see one or two of their friends, they're going to see a lot of their friends in one environment. So it becomes an even more valuable experience. So those are the three principles for a community-driven party. And now I want to wrap up. I want us to pause for a second. I want you to think about your life. I want you to think about your relationship with loneliness, your relationship with community. How many close friends do you have? How often do you feel real, deep connection? If it's not a lot, that's okay. We can change things. If we structure our events in a way that drives connectivity, that makes it easy for people to make new friendships and to connect in different ways. If we structure our events in a way that drives community, that makes it possible for people to form deep, enriching bonds over time, then we can start to put a really big dent in the deep societal conditions that cause us to be lonely and to feel disconnection. And if we do this, if we elevate the way that we see parties, social gatherings, concerts, shows, if we change the way we look at those and organize those, then we can transform people's lives and thereby transform the world. Thank you.
All right, thank you again.